backing up that story. Up next, Jeffrey Smith, Genetic Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically modified foods. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Special floating format night tonight on Coast to Coast. First of all, Jeffrey Smith for the next couple hours. He's the international best-selling author and independent filmmaker, the leading spokesperson on the health dangers of genetically modified organisms. He has united leaders to support the campaign for healthier eating in America, which is a revolutionary industry and consumer movement to remove GMOs from the U.S. food supply. Mr. Smith, also the executive director of the Institute for Responsible Technology. He has counseled world leaders from every continent, campaigned to end the use of genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, and influenced the first state laws in the United States regulating GMOs. Later tonight, I will read two statements, by the way, one from Monsanto, one from the Biotechnology Industry Organization, to give their views on the topic we've got with Jeffrey Smith tonight. Jeffrey, welcome back to Coast to Coast.
Thank you, George. Good to be here.
My pleasure. Well, Earth Day and lots of things going on. And, of course, you, my friend, still very busy, aren't you?
Indeed. Been to 30 countries. And just yesterday we launched the No GMO Challenge, where 30 people can stop eating GMOs for 30 days and see if they can do it.
How long have GMOs been in our system?
Primarily since 1996, with the introduction of genetically modified soy, corn, cotton, and canola.
Okay, now also, what about the bovine? We've talked about that hormone in the past.
Yeah, that actually came in a couple of years earlier, in 1994, a genetically modified drug injected into cows to increase milk supply. And the milk that comes from those cows has higher levels of a cancer risk hormone called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. And there's a lot of controversy when the FDA approved it. In fact, I interviewed for my film a whistleblower who was a veterinarian doing the review process for the FDA and was fired because he was told he was holding up the approval process. There were a couple of investigative reporters for Fox TV that were going to do a four-part news story to blow the whistle and link it to cancer, and threatening letters from Monsanto's attorney promising dire consequences ultimately canceled the series. We have very good news on RBGH today. Governor Sebelius of Kansas just vetoed a bill which would have required any company that listed a non-RBGH claim on their milk to also include a disclaimer claiming that the FDA sees no difference between milk from cows treated with RBGH and those that don't. That disclaimer was written by Monsanto's former attorney, who later became Monsanto's vice president, but he was the top FDA person in charge of policy, overlooking the approval of Monsanto's RBGH.
True. And hasn't Monsanto since either sold that division or something? I don't know if they're associated with it anymore.
Yes, they sold it in the fall because we're seeing a tipping point of consumer rejection against the drug. More than 50 of the top 100 dairies have rejected it in some or all of their products, including Walmart, Yoplait, Dannon, Starbucks. And so they saw that the writing was on the wall. They abandoned the drug to Eli Lilly, but there's still efforts to try and get state legislation to make these non-GMO claims either illegal or very difficult.
Is Lilly still producing it, and is it still widespread?
It is still widespread. In 2002, it was used by about 22% of the dairy cows in the United States. Now it's probably below 15% and dropping quickly.
What was the purpose? Why did they need this hormone?
Well, they didn't need it. It supposedly increases milk supply by about 5 to 10%. It also burns out the cows. It's called crack for cows. It also increases the amount of pus in the milk because of a painful udder infection called mastitis, which increases the amount of antibiotics used, which also get in the milk. And there's also more bovine growth hormone in the milk. It's interesting to look at the rigged research that was used to get the milk approved. In fact, when stolen documents from the FDA later published showed that when Monsanto's researchers wanted to show that injections did not interfere with the fertility of cows, they secretly added cows to the study that were already pregnant before they were injected. And when they wanted to show that the hormone that was increased in the milk was destroyed during pasteurization, they pasteurized the milk 120 times longer than normal, but only destroyed 19% of the hormone. So they added a huge amount of powdered hormone into the milk, then heated it 120 times longer, and then destroyed 90% of the hormone. And that's what the FDA reported, that pasteurization destroys 90% of the hormone. Completely rigged research regulations, but that's what the FDA got behind.
Jeffrey, when we see organic milk on the shelves, is that indeed organic? No drugs used?
Absolutely. Organic does not allow the use of bovine growth hormone and other drugs. It's something that they're very, very conscientious about. In fact, there's also a lot of milk on the shelf that says no RBGH. Now, a big difference between the two is if it's an organic milk, then the animals are not fed genetically modified feed. So the corn and soy that they might be fed is not GMO. Whereas if it says no RBGH, but it doesn't say organic, then it's likely that the cows are also fed genetically modified feed.
Jeffrey, let's chat a little bit about the genetically modified foods. First of all, I have seen some statistics, and you correct me, that some 65 to 70% of all processed food products in stores just in this country are all over the place, have been there for about the last 10 years. Is that true?
Absolutely. And you go onto our website at healthiereating.org, and there's a shopping guide, and it'll help you to identify which foods are genetically modified and how to avoid them. The reason why there's so many is not because there's so many different varieties of genetically engineered foods. It's because the 8 genetically engineered food crops are used in a lot of processed foods, particularly the soy and corn, also the canola and cottonseed oil, and most recently the introduction of genetically modified sugar beets. The other 3 are Hawaiian papaya, a little bit of zucchini and crookneck squash. But the soy and corn derivatives, they're omnipresent. And so it's difficult to just go to the center part of a supermarket and just pick things out at random to avoid GMOs. You have to sort of learn how to do it.
What has been the argument for the production of genetically modified foods?
Well, there's a lot of myths. For example, they claim that the crops will increase productivity, but a recent report that came out actually last week from the Union of Concerned Scientists showed that it does not increase yield. The report was called Failure to Yield. It was claimed that it will allow foods to grow in unusual conditions. That's also not true. It was claimed that it would reduce the use of agricultural chemicals, but actually it's increased the use of pesticides by about 250 million pounds in the first 11 years. So there's a lot of myths associated with it, but they haven't panned out. In fact, scientists who've discovered adverse findings have often been fired, stripped of responsibilities, or forced out. And I've interviewed several for my books and films.
I'm going to read a couple statements here, and I want to get your reaction, Jeffrey. And and it's only fair to have these statements on the record.
Great.
This one is from Monsanto. We requested that they have a statement or spokesperson available to the program, and they sent this statement. Then they also recommended the biotechnology industry, and we've got a statement from them, and they are very willing to come on to a future program, the folks from the biotechnology industry organization. Here's Monsanto's statement. I want to get your reaction to this first of all. It says, regarding your Monsanto-specific inquiry about sterile seed technology, our statement is this. Monsanto has never developed or commercialized a sterile seed product. Monsanto made a commitment in 1999 not to commercialize sterile seed technology in food crops. We stand firmly by this commitment. Now, exactly what is a sterile seed product, Jeffrey?
Well, it's called Terminator technology in common parlance, where they genetically engineer something, and when they produce the crop is sterile and cannot be planted. It's true, it hasn't been commercialized. There's a big uproar. In fact, it was developed in part with USDA money with the intention to sell it to the 1.4 billion farmers in the world that save their seeds because they don't give the seed companies anything. And so by converting them into regular seed buyers, it enhances the money of the seed sellers, but it actually reduces the amount of biodiversity dramatically in the food supply and puts our food security at risk. But the biotechnology industry is trying to promote Terminator technology and using the Canadian government to introduce it at international conferences, and so they keep trying to do it year after year.
In the old days, farmers would plant their crops, but they'd hold back seeds, right, for the following year. Mm-hmm. That's not happening anymore, is it?
When you buy a genetically engineered crop, you sign a contract that says you will not save seeds, you will buy them year after year. And sometimes Monsanto will actually send people and take samples of your seeds illegally and test them. And if they find that there's contamination, then they'll write a letter threatening to sue you. And they've actually made more than $200 million threatening or suing farmers.